the wide line. The Shmuel Amar Asara. Shmuel said that the space between the sukkah on top of a sukkah, at what point do we say now you have a sukkah? I mean, if it's just one tefach, so that's not a tefach. You have one layer of schach and you have another layer of schach. At what point do we say now you have a sukkah on top of a sukkah? So Shmuel said you need 10 tefachim. My time is Shmuel. What's the reason for Shmuel? Just like it's kosher, that also makes it invalid. So in order to give it a name of a sukkah on top of a sukkah, you need 10 tefachim, because in order to be called a sukkah, it has to be 10 tefachim to validate it. So in order to be called a sukkah, to invalidate the lower sukkah, makes sense to say you need 10 tefachim. Now in our Mishnah we had, Rabbi Yehuda said at the end of the Mishnah, now the Tanakam started off in the Mishnah, we say that you're not allowed to make a sukkah under a sukkah. Then Rabbi Yehuda added on, if no one lives on the top, then the bottom one is kosher. So back to our Gemara, Tanan. Rabbi Yehuda, if one does not live on the top, then the bottom one will be kosher. What does that mean? No one lives. It means really to live up there. We really care if someone lives up there or not. No, we have to know if it's a sukkah or not. Not every minute someone's going to be living up there. So we mean to say is that when no one's living there, means no one's able to live there. So must be what's not worthy of living up there is 10 tefachim. This must be according to Rabbi Yehuda. In order for a sukkah to be on top of a sukkah, the top sukkah has to be at least 10 tefachim. So he's arguing with the Tanakama. So must be the Tanakama does not hold 10 tefachim. Must hold that Tanakama must hold that it's less than 10 tefachim. It's not like Shmuel. So now what are we going to do? So I have a question on Shmuel. Shmuel says 10 tefachim. That the upper sukkah has to at least be 10 tefachim in order to invalidate the lower sukkah. But it looks like Rabbi Yehuda is the one that holds. So Rabbi Yehuda, the second Tana in our Mishnah, is the one that holds that 10 tefachim, not the Tanakama. So Kiyaster Rav Dimi came to Babel. Amri B'Amarab. He said that they said in the West. They said in Eretz Yisrael. The bottom sukkah, meaning the schach of the bottom sukkah, which is the floor of the top of the upper sukkah, cannot contain the pillows and blankets, then at that point tachtanik shera. So what does it mean? What does it mean when you're not worthy to support? It's not able to support. It's not worthy to live in the upper sukkah. When the schach of the lower sukkah cannot hold up the pillows and blankets of the upper sukkah. We're 2 lines up from the Mishnah. I'm just going back a little bit. On Yeramanal. So we see from here. So right now, so we see the Tanakama. So we see the machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and Tanakama has nothing to do with 10 tefachim. The machlekes between the two was whether it could contain it was strong enough to support the pillows and blankets. But so it would apparently at this point the machlekes between the two is not that. And so we still have that. So it could be 10 tefachim. So everyone agrees. It seems like to the 10 tefachim of Reb Shmuel, the machlekes in the Tanakama and Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda was whether how strong the upper sukkah has to be. Now, the Tanakama saw psula, but no, that's not so true. Because if the machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama is how much if the schach of the bottom sukkah, meaning the floor of the upper sukkah, is able to hold a pillow and blankets, that means and Rabbi Yehuda is one that holds it has to be able to hold it. So that means according to the Tanakama, even if it could hold it, then it'll still be puzzle. And that means even below 10. So no, the machlekes between the Tanakama and the Rabbi Yehuda is as follows. According to Tanakama, it has to be able to hold it. It has to be 10. Everyone agrees to Shmuel that has to be 10. However, the Tanakama holds that it has to be able to firmly, able to support pillows and blankets without any special navigation to make sure the beams don't fall. While Rabbi Yehuda held, no, this has to be rolled. You have to be able to be there. You have to, step lightly over the beams and make sure not to put on your entire weight, so on and so forth, as you slowly maneuver your pillows and blankets into place. As long as it could hold it, as long as the sukkah doesn't come crashing down, it's kosher. So again, the Tanakama, everyone agrees apparently to the 10. It has to be at least 10. The Tanakama hold has to be a very, very firm surface, and there's no worry at all. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, no, it just has to be able to hold your pillow and blankets, al diachah, with a, it has to be able to hold its own blankets in some type of fashion, even though it's not as strong at all. Okay, we're up to the Mishnah on Yud Amud Aleph. We're up to the Mishnah on 10a, towards the bottom. Says the Mishnah, Piris Aleha Sadin b'fnei achama. If someone throws a cloth over the sukkah because of the heat, or you hang it below the schach, to catch the leaves. Or I have a bed in my sukkah, and this is a 4-poster bed, and I throw a sheet, I drape a canopy over my bed, my poster bed. Then it's all, in all these cases, it's all going to be puzzle. Now the reason is that the cloth on top of the sukkah and the cloth on bottom of the sukkah, you're utilizing as part of the roof, and that's mekabel tama. So something which is mekabel tama is not valid to be schach. Now, the reason for the 4-poster bed, because you're not sitting in the sukkah, you're sitting in if there's a full roof, which there is, because if you have 4 posters and you throw a sheet over it, then there'll be more than a tepach, or a flat surface. So I'm not sitting under a sukkah now, I'm sitting under a canopy bed. Therefore, it's going to be puzzle. Aval Pyrus who algabe nakliti hamita, but you could go ahead and throw it over a 2-poster bed, because a 2-poster bed, it slopes and there's no, it's a pointy edge, and there's no one tefach wide roof. Therefore, it's not considered oil, and also it's not part of the schach. It's clearly not part of the schach. It's on top of your bed. It's like wearing a raincoat or a hat in the sukkah. That's permitted. It's not called, you're not sitting in the sukkah, because it's not considered an oil. It's not considered a roof, nor is it part of the roof to make it to be considered pasal schach, because it's mekabel tuma. So therefore, that's the differentiation. So if I have something which I'm using to protect myself from the roof, that's going to be part of the roof. Therefore, it's mekabel tuma. That's not going to be schach. And the other issue is going to be if there's a more than a tefach wide covering over my head, then perhaps you're running into issues of oil, and therefore, in this case, a 4-poster bed, I'm sitting under a 4-poster bed, not a sukkah. Now we're up to the Gemara. Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says the following: that we only mentioned that it's not kosher because it's protecting it from the leaves. But if you're using it to beautify the sukkah, if I'm hanging things below the schach in order to beautify it, then everyone agrees that it's going to be kosher, because as Rashi writes, it doesn't have the name of schach. I'm not utilizing the sukkah decorations that are hanging from the roof, from the schach. I'm not using to add on to my schach. I'm not using it to increase, to protect myself. Rather, I'm just using it to beautify the sukkah, and therefore it doesn't have the name of a roof or the name of schach. Rather, it's the name of decorations. Therefore, even though it's mekabel tuma, it's not going to passel the sukkah. Now, pshita vehaneshek. So you said, well, come on. It's obvious. Rav Chisda, what are you telling us? There's no chiddush here. We wrote because of the leaves, and only because of the leaves. So we could have figured that out ourselves. As for beauty, it wouldn't be a problem. So again, I might think that even if I'm hanging up a sheet under the schach and it's for beauty, that will also be usher. It will also be an issue, even if it's not for just to catch it. It will also be considered part of the schach and mekabel tama. So why would I think the Mishnah would why would the Mishnah state leaves? But in the Mishnah just said catch leaves, because that's usually what you do. When you spread a sheet under the schach, it's to catch leaves. Kamash one, so it comes to teach us that no, he's telling us no. When he says nesher, it's specifically for the leaves and nothing else. Therefore, if you're doing it to beautify the sukkah, it's not a problem. Maybe we could go bring a raya, or sort of a proof from a brayso to Rav Chisda. Let's say I have my schach as according to halacha, and the itra bikrimin and then you put some type of cloth up, and you put up sheets with pictures on it. And you hang up nuts, shkedim, or almonds, aparskimin, peaches, the remainim, and pomegranates, prichilianovim, or vines, ataresh al shavulin, and types of and stalks of wheat, yaina shmanis. You have wine and you have oil in flasks to hang up on top on the roof. Also the slosais, and also you have a type of a flour Asur listapik mihen. It's forbidden to go ahead and have any contain any dry benefit from them. So if you hang anything up for beauty during sukkah, on the sukkah for the sukkah during the entire sukkahs, all 7 days, it's going to be forbidden. Now we turn the page to the top of Yom days. And it will be muksa until the end of sukkahs. Then now if you make it tanai, then you're saying I'm putting it up for the beauty. However, I still want to go ahead and be able to utilize it for whatever I want to do, then it's going to be permitted. Now, we see from here, perhaps this is a nice proof to Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said that if I hang something up below the schach for beauty, it's not going to invalidate, it's not going to consider schach possible and invalidate the roof. And over here, we have a whole brisa that says you're hanging up pomegranates, you're hanging up flasks of wine, and you're hanging up, in fact, the real important one, it says you hung up sheets of pictures of sheets embroidered with pictures on it. That's just like the sheets in our Mishnah. And you spread, and we're assuming we're spreading that under the schach. And here it is permitted. In the Mishnah, it's not permitted. The reason is, like Rav Chisda, in the Mishnah, it was being utilized as a part of the roof to catch the leaves. That invalidates it because we look at it as part of the roof. When it comes to if you're just adorning the sukkah, then it's not a problem. So perhaps this is a proof of Chisda. The answer is no. Dilma, says the Gemara, min atzad idmar. Maybe all these cases that you're hanging the sheets from the side. In that case, it's muksa. But the Mishnah that you can't really prove from this brisa that I could go ahead and hang. I could go ahead and hang sheets from the bot right under the schach if I want to beautify the sukkah, because perhaps the brisa is specifically talking about the side, not the top. So therefore, we don't. It's not saying Rav Chisda is wrong. It's just saying we don't have a proof for Rav Chisda. But I think everyone agrees with Rav Chisda that the Gemara asked. The Gemara says obvious. Of course, if you're hanging it below the roof for anything other than to protect you, it should be permitted. Okay. Nice sukkah, sukkah. Let's say I put up sukkah decorations. It's not going to lower the amount of ear space in the sukkah. So, for example, if I have a sukkah higher than 20, Rashi explains, if I have a sukkah higher than 20 tefachim, if I'm hanging a flask of wine, now that flask of wine is dipping below the sukkah, then it's not going to help me dip below the 20 amis mark. It's not going to help me say that the airspace in the sukkah is less than 20, because first of all, it's not part of it. We learned in the Mishnah that the sukkah decorations are not part of the sukkah. And remember, if it is part of the sukkah, you have bigger problems, because if you consider part of the sukkah and it's hanging from the roof, now you have something which is makabel tumah, and it's going to totally invalidate the entire sukkah anyway. So therefore, it's not going to help you lower the airspace. And also on the flip side, if I have a sukkah of 10 tefachim and I have something hanging down, it's not going to say the airspace in the sukkah is now 9 tefachim, because again, the sukkah decorations are totally separate from the schach. However, from the side, when we say the small sukkah is 7 tefachim and a little bit by 7 tefachim and a little bit, if I have some type of thick blanket hanging on the side, and now I have less than that amount, it will invalidate it. And Rashi explains the reason is because over here, the size of the sukkah is more of the size of the shear of a 7 by 7 sukkah is in order to contain a person and most of his body and his table. If I have my walls, are whether I like it or not, for practice, whether it's the sukkah or my decorations, if I have less than that space, I can no longer be contained. Therefore, I invalidate my sukkah. So that's the difference between the roof, which we're just looking as is a part of the roof or not. And remember, if it is part of the roof, you have a bigger problem, and it helps you out. With the airspace, you have bigger problems because now it's anyway going to be makabel toma and invalidate the sukkah. And however, from the side, it will cause a problem. Now we have a story. In Yamin Avi Rav Ashi, it Misha Leka Katanta B'maya. That the Minyamin, who is a servant of Rav Ashi, he somehow got he soaked the shirt. He got his shirt soaking wet. And he spread it out on top of the sukkah. So Rav Ashi said, remove it immediately. So people don't start saying that Rav Ashi is covering his sukkah with something which is makabel tuma, shirt, which is a garment. A garment is makabel tuma, and Rav Ashi was afraid people are going to see the shirt on top and think that he was utilizing something which is makabel tuma schach, which is a schach puzzle. But I don't understand why the Rashi is so concerned. Just people see it dripping wet. If it's dripping wet, it won't be a problem. And people are going to see that. Sorry, again, people are going to see it's dripping wet, and they'll put two and two together. They'll say, "Oh, the reason it's on top is because it's drying out, not because he's utilizing a schach." No, he was still nervous. He said, "Well, it might dry up, and then it will forget to remove it, and people are going to come by and say a dry shirt on top of the sukkah and think that he's utilizing that as sukkah instead of kapatoma." So he told his servant to remove it. Okay. Related to all this, concerning nice sukkah, we spoke about nice sukkah, the sukkah decorations. Let's say it's lower from the roof than from 4 tefachim. Nachman Amar Kashera. Or Nachman says that it's still going to be kosher. Now, Chesta, Rabbi Boruch sorry, I skipped. Nice sukkah muflagin mena arba. Rav Nachman Amar Kashera. Rav Nachman says that's going to be kosher. Chesta, Rabbi Boruch Amar Psula. That they hold that it's going to be puzzle. They hold that it's going to be more if it's within 4 tefachim, if it's lower than 4 tefachim from the roof, then you might be running into problems of a covering. That if it's within 4 tefachim of the roof, we could all understand. If I have something hanging from the sukkah, 4 tefachim, I can understand that's an adornment. It's adorning the sukkah. It's a light for the sukkah, whatever it is. However, once it's hitting below 4 tefachim, I might be nervous that it's so separate from the schach, we no longer look at it as if it is a like an accessory to the schach concerning for decoration. Rather, perhaps it's its own entity. And if it's more than a tefach wide, we are concerned that we might look at it as if it is its own oil, its own covering. When you're sitting under it, you might be sitting under an oil, not under a sukkah. You're sitting under it something covering of its own entity. That was Rav Chisda's and Rabbi Baruch's concern. But Rav Nachman had no such concern. Now, Rav Chisda, Rabbi Baruch Ikloi Libei Reish Kalusa. Rav Chisda and Rabbi Baruch will go into a story concerning this exact argument. He came to the house of the Reish Kalusa, the head of the community, and that was Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman started to have some fun with them because he noticed they argued on him, and he put them in a sukkah to sleep in or to eat in when they came with a shinoya that it's the nice sukkah, the sukkah decorations were lower than 4, so they held that lower than 4 might invalidate the sukkah. So he put them in such a sukkah on purpose because he held it's not a problem, and he expected them to come out and they'll start arguing and arguing in halacha. Now, however, they were quiet and they didn't say anything. They didn't come running out screaming. They just kept quiet and they ate in there and slept in there. So Amar Luhu Hader Buhu Rabbanan Misham Tayu. So the next morning or after they finished, Rav Nachman turns to them and says, "So you guys, you were chayzer. You turned back. You changed your mind and you said sitting in a sukkah with decorations lower than 4 is not going to invalidate it." Amar Luhu Anan Shluchim Mitzvah Anan. He said no. We were on a mitzvah mission. We were fulfilling a mitzvah our entire time here because they were going to greet their Rebbe. They're going to greet their master. And their master was Rav Nachman. It's a mitzvah on the holidays to go be Makabel Pnei Rabbi, to go greet your master and talk in Torah and learn from him. And that was their mission. And when someone's busy doing a mitzvah, he's pater from the mitzvah of sukkah. And that will come later on, that when one is busy doing one mitzvah, usually he's pater from a different mitzvah, and there's different rules that apply. So they said, it's true, we held that this was an invalid sukkah, but we didn't care because we were not obligated at this point in the mitzvah of sukkah. Okay, that is the end of that story. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now that we spoke about in the Mishnah about the canopy bed, and for the next bit, we're going to be talking about different various sizes of canopy beds and why they're usher, what size are they usher. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Mutter lisham bekila b'sukkah after sheish leigag. It's permitted for one to sleep in a 4 canopy bed, even though there isn't, even though there's a roof. So I have a 4 canopy bed. I have a sheet spread over it. It's permitted to sleep there. But it's on condition that's not 10 tefachim high. Yeah, okay. From the bed up, it's not 10 tefachim high. Tashma Hayashan bikila besukkah lo yitzei chavasai. We asked that we learned that if you sleep in a kila, which is the exact bed that he mentioned, you did not fulfill your obligation. No, because that's over 10. But when the bed is below 10 tfachim, the covering is below 10 tfachim, it's not a problem. Again, we have another a brisa. We learned, or Mishnah, we learned that if someone sleeps under a bed, on you don't fulfill your obligations. So why is this any different? You're sleeping on a bed with a covering over it. Again, that's talking specifically when the above you is higher than 10 tefachim. Tashma. Now we're going to bring our Mishnah. Our Mishnah clearly states if I throw a canopy over a 4-poster bed, it's going to invalidate it. There too, it's also because it's higher than 10. So our Mishnah, according to Rabbi Boruch, is specifically talking about higher than 10 tefachim. There's that shuba we learned elsewhere. You can't say that the Tani because we learned naklitin shnayim, a bed which is called a naklitin, which is the second. It happens to be that's the second one mentioned in our Mishnah. Remember, our Mishnah had 2 cases. One was a 4-poster bed. We said that's invalid if I cannot sleep under that if I throw a canopy over it. And then we had a 2-poster bed, which you said was sloped and there's no roof, therefore it's not a problem sleeping in it under it in the sukkah. So naklitin shnayim, naklitin has 2, therefore it's sloped. And a knifais, which was the first case in our Mishnah, has 4 posters. Pierce agabi knifais psula. If you spread them above a knifais, then it's invalid. You cannot sleep under that. You cannot sleep under a canopy, which is on top of 4-poster bed on sukkahs because it's a roof. Agabi naklitin sheira. On top of naklitin is permitted because there is no roof. It's totally sloped. However, it's on condition by the case of naklitin where it is sloped. The naklitin has to be lower than 10. So according to Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, he wanted to say that one is permitted to go ahead and sleep under a 4-poster bed as long as it's under 10. But we clearly have a Mishnah that said that you only could sleep under the sloped covering, the 2-poster bed with the slope covering if it's under 10. Must be when the Mishnah when this price is stated that one cannot sleep under a 4-poster bed, it's even when it's under 10. Although there's no machlekes between the two, so we have a proof that when one is sleeping on a 4-poster bed, even under 10 tefachim, it's going to be it's invalid, and that is a question on Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So over here we have an interesting answer that we come out that a kinifais is different because it's kavua, that is a very it's a permanent bed, whatever that means. Maybe it's extremely heavy. It's not meant to be moved. It's meant to stay in place. It's built to stay in place. So if I have this type of bed, or this permanent 4-poster bed, so if I have a permanent 4-poster bed, even under 10 tefachim, we'll consider it as a covering, and we'll consider it as an oil. However, now if it's not permanent, however, 2-poster bed that needs 10 tefachim, regardless if it's permanent or not. Okay. Now, Bahari Sukkah, Al Gabi Sukkah, the Kvi Va'amar Shmuel, Kachsher Kach Psula. So this is a very good question. A sukkah on top of a sukkah. Now we know a sukkah is not supposed to be permanent. That's the whole point of the 20 amas. A sukkah can't be 20 amas high because that makes it into a permanent structure dwelling. Therefore, a sukkah has to be considered to be temporary. Now, a sukkah on top of a sukkah is going to be invalid. Now, according to on the previous Amud, we saw Shmuel right before the mission when we started today's class. We said that a sukkah on top of a sukkah, the top sukkah has to be at least 10 tefachim in order to be called in order to invalidate the lower sukkah. So we spot why. I don't understand. If you can't have something on top of you, if something which is permanent, which has a covering on it, is lower than 10, is still invalid, because we just learned that the reason why the 4-poster canopy bed is going to invalidate the person sleeping under it is because it's permanent. So the sukkah on top, even under 10 tefachim, so sukkah on top of a sukkah, which is going sukkah on top of a sukkah, which is sukkah on top is going to be even though we're supposed to be in a temporary dwelling, but a sukkah is a permanent structure. It's pretty heavy, right? It's 2 separate. You have to separate the 2. There's the idea that it's a permanent dwelling, meaning this is where I live the entire year, as opposed to a certain a short amount of time of year, as opposed to what we're talking about over here that's heavy or light. the sukkah is heavy, and once you build it, it's very hard to move, right? You don't really build a full wooden sukkah and start schlepping it around the place, where it is it sits there the entire time. So a sukkah on top of a sukkah, so it's a permanent structure. You're sleeping under a permanent structure, a very heavy structure, and still it has to be 10 fachim according to Shmuel. So how could Shmuel say that a 4-poster canopy bed is only that a sukkah according to Shmuel, that 4-poster canopy bed, if it's permanent, even less than 10 is going to be a problem. But a sukkah which also has this label, this title of permanent, needs to be at least 10 fachim in order to invalidate its sukkah underneath it. I was going to on the previous amar. I mean, the mafsul sukkah, but ma'asara. So there's a significant difference between the case of a sukkah on top of a sukkah and a canopy bed. The reason why a sukkah on top of a sukkah is invalid is because you have a actual, not because of an oil. That's not going to that's technically not really a problem because I have schach, and then I have schach on top of the upper sukkah. I'm not really under a structure without any schach. There's just 2 levels of schach. So the problem is, the specific problem is a sukkah on top of a sukkah. I can't have a sukkah on top of a sukkah. I can't have something called a sukkah on top of me. And in order to be called a sukkah, it has to be 10 fachim. But if it's less than 10 fachim, it's not a problem. There's no sheet spread over. As schach on top of schach, well, there's no problem with that. Therefore, sukkah on top of sukkah at least has to be 10 fachim, even though it's extremely heavy. Hachi del shui oila. Over here by the canopy bed, the problem is that I have an additional covering on top of my head. There is no schach on top of my head. I'm sleeping in a bed with a covering, with a sheet over it, the canopy over it, and the schach is above that. So the canopy, so I'm sleeping under a canopy which has the title of a roof, as opposed to under the sukkah. And for that to take place, less than 10 could also be an oil, right? We find by an oil could be as small as a tefach y by a tefach high. We find it by the case of impurity. That's when it spreads over the whole house and doesn't go straight up. When there's an oil, what is an oil of? And that case, it's only a tefach high by tefach y. So in order to be considered that you're sleeping under a roof other than the sukkah, all you need is a tefach. Therefore, a 4-poster bed, even though it's less than 10, as long if it's permanent, if we look at it, if we don't move it around as a permanent structure, then even less than 10 fachim, it will be a problem, and you can't bring a proof from a sukkah, because a sukkah, in order to be called a sukkah, has to be 10 fachim. The problem is not that you're not sleeping under schach. The problem is that you're sleeping under a sukkah. Amarav Tachlifa. We're going to go further. We're about 10 lines from the bottom. A beautiful minute base. Amarav Tachlifa. Anyone have any questions so far? Good. Okay.
No,
good.
I'm fine, Rabbi, but maybe for the benefit of everyone online, perhaps we should say which line we're on and what the first word is.
I just said that. We're 10 lines up. The first word is Batzir Masar. Yeah.
With the 2-poster bed, you're still underneath.
So the 2-poster bed, the problem is not that the fact that you're under a covering. The problem is that you're under a halachic roof. In order to call something a halachic roof, it has to be it has to be a tefach wide. On a 2-poster bed, there is no tefach wide. It goes straight, it's a pinpoint. Yeah. Okay, yeah. We're about 9, I think we're 9 lines up. Last word line, Amarav. Amarav Tachlifa bar Avimi Amar Shmuel. Hayashan bikila arum. If someone is sleeping in a kila, which we said was the 2-poster bed, so it's sloped, and you're sleeping there naked, Moitzi Roishe Chutz Kila, and now he wants to go ahead and recite Kriya Shema or say a blessing, but the halacha is one is naked. He's not allowed to go ahead and recite any blessing. The problem is because then the heart sees his lower body, and the heart is not supposed to see it. Therefore, one is supposed to get dressed and have some type of tight item around his waist. Now, the problem is over here. He's sleeping naked, so all he has to do, just put his head outside of the canopy, the Kriya Krishma, and he could go ahead and recite Kriya Shema, meaning it's like the clothing. The canopy is equal to the clothing as long as he puts his head out. Now the canopy is separating his heart from the rest of his body, from the lower body. It's not a problem. So with this, we're gonna ask a question. We learned that one is sleeping naked in a kila in this 2-poster bed. He cannot just move out his head and recite Kriya Shema. Well, we just recited that he could. It's a stira. It's a stira. Contradiction. We're talking about when it's higher than 10. So this is what it is. If we learned till now that even a a two-poster bed. If it's higher than 10 tefachim, we're going to view it as its own, even though it's not a tefach wide, we're still going to view it as its own entity because it's more than 10 tefachim high. It's sort of chashuv. It's large. It's important. So we're going to view a two-poster bed more than 10 tefachim as its own entity. So if it's lower than 10 tefachim, we don't view it as its own entity, and we don't view it as if you're sleeping on the sukkah. So that means if I have a two-poster bed lower than 10 tefachim, and I have my canopy over it, and we don't view it as its own entity. So when I stick out my head, we're viewing it as a canopy, just as clothing. It's no different than clothing. It's a piece of cloth spread over myself. Now, it happens to be that it's maybe, I don't know, a foot or 2 feet high above me, but who cares? It's an article of clothing. So when I stick out my head, it's not a problem. So that's the first one. The second one is over 10 tefachim. When it's over 10 tefachim, now we're viewing this as its own entity, and it's considered like it has its own roof. It's its own little structure and dwelling. If one is in a house, just like one's in a house, and he's naked, he can't recite Kriya Shema. What do you mean? I'm fully covered. No, that's the house. You have no clothing on you. So when it comes to the poster bed, which is more than 10 tefachim, when we're viewing it as its own entity, sticking out your head is not going to help you. It's just like sticking your head out the door. It's not going to help your house. It's not going to help you. So that's the difference between the two. It also makes sense. In the Seifa that Bryce we said, what's this compared to? It's like the same case. Sitting in a canopy bed, which is more than 10 tefachim, and you stick your head out, it's just like you're sticking your head out the window of your house. Again, we don't view the house as the clothing to your body. So if it's higher than 10 tefachim, the canopy bed we look for you as like it's its own entity, its own house, and you cannot go ahead and just stick your head out and say, I'm separate. The body's separate, the heart is separate from the lower body, and therefore the same idea with the sukkah. I'm sleeping in there. So 1 to 10 tefachim, I'm in my own entity, I'm not under a sukkah. But lower than 10 tefachim, it's not a problem for the sukkah, and it also helps you out when one is naked because we view it as clothing as opposed to a house. Okay, we're going to turn to the top of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. We're up to the top of 11a. Ubayis nami afal pishin gvaya asara, and it happens to be, let's say I'm in a house and it's less than 10 tefachim, but it still has the title. It's labeled as a house. It's not going to help you either. Just like we don't buy knifa, it's a 4-poster bed, which is less than 10 tefachim. If it's a permanent structure, we view it as its own entity, and therefore, in such a case, just like a house, if one is naked, sticking his head out the window of a house less than 10 tefachim, or of the 4-poster bed, is not going to help you saying that I have a article of clothing separate the top part of my body to the lower part of my body, because again, we're not viewing this the cloth canopy or the physical house even less than 10 tefachim as a article of clothing. We're rather viewing it as a building, as a structure, because it has a permanent sense to it. Now, lishna achrina, another way to say all this. Now we're going to have a different variation of what we just said, a little different. One is permitted to sleep in a kilas chasanim, which is a sloped bed, which is a 2-poster bed, and the canopy is sloped. That's what I meant. The sukkah lefisha in God, because there is no roof to it. Even though it's higher than 10, which is a little different than what we said before. What we said before, it's perhaps I'll take it back. It's not so different. So according to this, a kilas chasanim is a 2-poster bed, and it's therefore the canopy is totally sloped. There is no 1 tefach wide point, and therefore it will be permitted to sleep in there in a sukkah, even though it's 10 tefachim. What do you mean? How could you say that a kilo, which is two, which have 2 posters and the canopy is totally sloped? How could you say that's permitted to sleep in there in a sukkah? And we don't view it as its own entity, and we view as if rather you're sleeping under sukkah, which happens to be like in a sleeping bag, no different than a sleeping bag. But we learned kila with 2-poster bed is you don't fulfill your obligation if you're sleeping down in a sukkah. We're talking about in this specific case when there is a gag. So I guess it seems like we're talking about that it is a kila, but on the top it's not exactly. It's an extremely wide poster. So if the post of the bed is more than a tefach, and even though it's sloped, but at least there is a tefach there. Therefore, it's going to give it the title, a halachic status of a roof. Tashma, we learned naklitin shnaim. A naklitin is a bed with 2 posts. 2 posts, meaning usually that means the canopy slopes and there's no halachic roof. The knifais arba, and a knifais is 4. Pirs al gav knifes psula. If you spread it on top of a 4-poster bed, it's going to be, and you sleep under that you have not fulfilled your obligation on sukkahs. Al gav menaklitin kshera. But 2-posters, since it's totally sloped and there is no one tefach to give it a status called a root, halachic roof will be kosher. But on condition that the 2-poster bed does not the canopy does not rise higher than 10 tefachim. So again, this is a question on what we just said. According to this version of Rabbi Shmuel, a kila more than 10 tefachim, a 2-poster bed more than 10 tefachim will be a problem. Over here we see more than 10 tefachim, kilas chasanim, even though it's higher than 10 tefachim, is not going to be a problem because there is no roof because it's totally sloped. However, over here we see that a kila, even though it's a two poster, the bed with two posts on it, and therefore the canopy is totally sloped, and therefore there's technically no halachic roof. Over here we see that it will be a problem if it's more than 10 tefachim. Answer is shani naklitin the kvi. The difference is there's a difference between an aklitin and a kilas chasanim. A kilas chasanim is a temporary. It's not heavy. It's meant to be moved around. Therefore, even though it's more than 10 tefachim, we view it as if it's not its own entity at all. However, an aklitin is much heavier, it's much stronger, it's meant to not to be moved, it's built to stay in place, and therefore, if it's more than tefachim, even though there's technically no halachic roof, we're still going to consider its own entity. So what's the difference between kvi and knifais? What's the difference between this 2-poster bed and this and the 4-poster bed? Because the Mishnah seems to differentiate between the two. Because what we just mentioned, we said we differentiated between the two. So the gabi knifais like kvi. The answer is like this, according to this version: a 4-poster bed, even if it's less than 10 tefachim, and it is not a permanent, and it's meant to be moved around. It's not permanent in any fashion. Still, since it's 4 posts, and it's the canopy spread over, it's more than a tefach. Even though it's less than 10 tefachim, we'll view it. It's an oil, and even though it's less than 10 tefachim, still you have a tefach wide. And although it's not permanent, it's meant to be moved around. The reason why we look at it, it's not the issue of its own entity. Rather, reviewing it because it has an halachic roof because of the 4 posts, and therefore the canopy on top is going to be more than a tefach wide. Therefore, even though it's less than 10 tefachim. However, with kila 2-poster bed, there is no halachic roof. So only way to invalidate you for sleeping under it in the sukkah is only if it's more than 10 tefachim, because then we view it as its own entity. So I'm just going to run through it. We're going to end there for today, just to go over the 2 different ways. So the first way we have a kina. The first one, if it's a 4-poster bed, this was the first version of Rabbi Shmuel. A 4-poster bed, which is kavua, which is a permanent structure, even less than 10 tefachim will be a problem. A kila, which is not kavua, it's a 4-poster bed, but it is it's a lighter structure and could be moved around. That needs to be at least 10 tefachim to be pasul. And a naklitin, a 2-poster bed, also needs to be more than 10 tefachim to be pasul. The second version of it is that kanifin, which is a 4-poster bed, and it's structure. It's a permanent structure. They're also even less than 10. A naklitin. Now, naklitin is a 2-poster bed. There is no halachic roof, and it's sort of kavua. That has to be more than 10 psukim. But a kilas. This is the difference between the two. A kilas chasanim, which is a 2-poster bed, and it is totally it's moved around as all the time. That is never going to make the sukkah invalid. Okay, and that's where we're up to for today. And I think